want you to linger on this point a little bit, because you said something there that I thought was interesting, that government is different than business. And I love to quote Nietzsche on this. Nietzsche says, everything the state says is a lie. Everything it has is stolen. So I guess we get into the definition of what a business really is. But ultimately, I think any human organization has to be business-like, right? It has to generate profits to be sustainable over time, which is something like it's solving problems for people in an economically efficient manner. But the exception to that would be a centralized government that has a money printer, because they can deficit spend, which is what we typically call it, but it's really just generate losses and tax the middle class and poor through money printing to paper over their losses and continue as a going concern. Can you linger on that distinction? What is this? Because we draw this bright line in the world, like, oh, that's private sector, this is public sector. But reality is there's a lot more continuity between the two. So I want you to just maybe linger on the difference between government and business, if you could.
I'm gonna take an direction.
And what business is the government in? I guess that's a good point to it.
What government is the business in? Or what business is the government in? That's a political question, right? You get a different answer if you ask a Democrat versus a Republican versus a Libertarian. Yeah. To me, the difference can only be maintained between. You can only say the government is different than business in a time of cheap, plentiful energy, where every entity, living thing, organization has to offset entropy, right? Which is just the wearing. You have to keep. I'm sitting here burning calories, thinking and talking, and if I stop, sooner or later, I'm going to fall over dead.
Yeah.
And in the short run, for government, maybe the great fraud or misrepresentation of the last 50 years has been the equation of fiat and energy. They were set equal to each other. And for a long time, there was no distinction. And to be clear, from 1973 to 2003, oil was, for the most of that time, I'm going to use oil just as a discrete proxy energy. Yeah. Okay. A barrel of oil from 73 through 03 traded the vast majority of that time between $15 and $25 a barrel. We were basically on an oil standard from 73. It was a loose pseudo peg to the dollar.
From the gold standard to the black gold standard.
To the black gold standard. Yeah. And that world had its issues. It had the reasons we did it. It helped us win the Cold War because we were printing dollars and the Soviets had to lift the oil and a whole bunch of different things. And then after 03, for a number of reasons, geologically, we had some major supergiant fields starting to roll over in production. We had China coming online with massive consumption. We went into la-la land, like basically, $25, $30 a barrel, $40 a barrel, $50 a barrel, $80 a barrel, $150 a barrel by 08. That's the dollar collapsing. That was a dollar collapsing against oil. And that's where everything starts to get, that's where the whole, well, we're government and that's business and it doesn't matter. In the end of the day, I'll take that money if that money keeps me, I can take it down to the corner and I don't have to wait in line and I can get 14 gallons of gasoline in my car for a price that I recognize. When that relationship starts to break down, that is where the whole government business line starts to break down, is how I would answer the question. There's a real world dynamic, because then if the government's money isn't good for energy, think about what that implies. The government's money isn't good for energy.
It's fake.
It's not only is it fake, but what are they going to do to you for moving away from it? They can't afford to pay the army. They can't afford to send a naval carrier over off your shores. They can't afford to go to war with you. So that to me, I think, is how I would delineate the difference that's not often talked about. But okay, yeah, like you said, you frequently hear this. Well, that's government accounting or government, and this is
and we had separate classes on it in college, as I'm sure you did.
Sure, too. Yeah, right.
But it's kind of bogus. It's kind of the same thing, just different titles and different style of accounting, but you're still doing the same thing.
Yeah, and so it really is. Hey, government deficits end up in emitting cash into the economy, which again is fine. And this is what the MMTers will say: well, just keep spending, the supply will come. That's where it breaks down. Yeah. When the supply doesn't come as fast as the money comes. Yeah. And then if that situation persists for long enough, we tie that back to our initial point about the psychological tipping point. Yeah. Except at this level of the game, that psychological tipping point is Vladimir Putin going, your paper, it's bad. Right. Give me gold. Xi saying, your paper, it's bad. Give me gold, and we're going to start buying our oil and commodities from Russia in yuan. Right. And
the bullshit detector goes off.
Exactly. And the difference at that level of the game is like Putin's got more nukes than we do. Yeah. And was willing to fight. That's, and I think another big surprise to everybody was, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, we can come back to that, but was willing to fight in Ukraine. And I think that in a proxy war with NATO. So at that level of the game, when you call bullshit, there's no convincing. It's not like you can get on CNBC or mainstream media and tell people that inflation's only 4 or 6 or 8 over and over and over. Putin doesn't care. Yeah, he's selling oil, and if his oil goes from buying him $30 to $60 to $90, and he looks and goes, God, I thought they were going to reform entitlements, and up until 2008-09, and now this is that psychological tipping point. Right. I thought they were going to reform entitlements. They said they were going to reform. They told me they were going to reform entitlements, and now they just printed the money. They didn't handle their banks the way they handled my economy when it collapsed 10 years ago, or anybody else's economy when they're Southeast Asians 15 years ago, etc. They printed the money, and they've got another 100 to 200 trillion to print in entitlements. They're probably going to print it. And now when I say this, now there's more missiles showing up on my borders that I'm paying for by buying their bonds. I'm out. Your money's no good here.
Gold.
I'll take your paper, but then I'll immediately roll it into something else. The Chinese, same thing. I will take your paper, your money, but I will then immediately roll it into something else of use. And that is the tipping point.
I think, man, I think you're touching on like kind of a profound point here, that it's like the extent to which money misrepresents energy. I guess energy could also be a proxy for goods and services, right? Because energy underlies the production of all goods.
Yeah, give me enough energy, right? I flew down here on American, and in American, you did a great job. And if I could afford it, I would have flown down here on a G5, not at 6 a.m. in the morning. Right. So that's just a function of the price of energy. If energy was free, I'd have done that, and I would have taken a helicopter right to your front lawn.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So as you said earlier, right, like the small lie turns into a bigger lie, into a bigger lie. But the money becoming more of a misrepresentation of energy or goods and services is like the spectrum across which it is becoming more of a lie, let's say. Yes. And then people at the highest level start to call that bluff, right? That are
not only do they call the bluff, but it becomes a threat to their national security. Right. That's where they're like where we are in the world. And I think this fourth turning is the lie has gotten so big, and it is so obvious that the only way you're either going to have, if you're not going to reduce the obligations to your own domestic political, you're not going to cut entitlements. Yeah. Then you're going to print the money. And if you print the money, Putin is in a situation where he has spent the last however many years, Russia's been lifting oil, selling it for dollars, storing it in paper dollar assets, bonds in particular. And he's going to wake up one day, and his biggest oil field, Samatlor or whatever it is going to roll over, go 100% water cut. his oil production will fall in half or even more. The price of oil will go from 90 to 300 overnight. And the paper he exchanged in return for energy, he will be out there trying to bid back energy at 70% less energy value than he sold it for. And he will be, deposed, best case, killed, worst case, overthrown, whatever. She is in the same problem on the opposite side of the same coin, which is to say he's a big oil importer.
Right. And there's back to the psychological engine, right? Because you get people. So basically Putin's saying, hey, this money is no longer energy.
Yeah.
Give me the money that is energy.
Correct.
Proof of work money, which is gold.
Yep.
And then his contemporaries, his peers, she, as you mentioned, is probably also looking across the table saying, oh, well, Putin psychologically, game theoretically said, forget the dollar, I'm going to go with gold. What are we doing? What should our position be, right? It kind of induces this imitation across people at that level. And before you know it, and this is where inflation's interesting, that it's actually can just be a purely psychological phenomenon. If enough people think the US dollar is going to hyperinflate, well, then everyone will sell their dollars and buy something else, and that will cause the US dollar to hyperinflate.
Well, and it comes back to that point of you can now what's the lever that's going to hit the bell, right?
Yeah.
So once Putin and Xi started doing that, they're big enough where the global central banks stopped growing holdings of treasuries. Basically, once they stopped, global central banks have not bought an incremental treasury on net since 2014 when they both stopped doing it. That then kind of shifts the pressure, our price discovery over to the treasury market. Okay. Supplies of treasuries, are they going to keep rising? Because right now we've got a cap on price insensitive buyers, right? Central banks aren't buying anymore.
Right.
Yet supply keeps rising. How are we going to fix that? Are we going to cut? If we would have said, okay, this doesn't work for us, we need to cut entitlements by 20%, 30% immediately, permanently, defense 20, 30% immediately, permanently.
Austerity.
Yeah. The problem is in a debt, when you already have run up enough debt, you go into a debt spiral. So that was not really possible. So then option number 2 is you find new buyers as your debt keeps rising. And we found those, right? We regulated money market funds into buying treasuries. We regulated banks into buying treasuries. We incented pensions with a tax benefit under Trump in 2018 to buy more treasuries. Even then, it wasn't enough. We had the repo rate spike. We had Fed do not QE. Then we had COVID, and we did Fed do big QE. And we've been talking about this treasury market dysfunction. We've been seeing dollar goes up, dollar gets too strong, rates start rising, even though the economy is slowing. This is emerging market behavior in the U.S. sovereign bond market. It is precisely what you would expect in a world where sort of the origin story is China and Russia said, we're done buying.
Right.
Central banks, as a result, stopped growing holdings of FX reserves, and the supply of bonds kept rising. Flat demand, rising supply, falling price. Falling price in bonds, yields up. But our debt level is so high, we can't afford yields beyond a certain point. So it gets into this point where they, Russia and China, have acted in their own. It's a matter of national. The lie got so big, the separation from energy got so egregious, they had to act in their national security interests. And it throws it back into our court, which is, oh my gosh, we can't afford all this stuff. Now it's a matter of our national security interest. What are we going to do? And that's kind of where we are. And
yeah, that word national security is very interesting because, as you said, when the foreign buyers of treasuries stopped buying, there was basically no more net increase after 2014. Then we start using the U.S. legal system to, you use the word regulate, I would say legally coerce a lot of these capital pools, and in some cases incentivize, to be more generous.
Sure.
To buy U.S. treasuries, right? Because you need a buyer for that debt to keep expanding all of the government, to pay for all the government programs that are already in place.
Correct.
Is that not just a catastrophe? I mean, you're because now all this capital is flowing into the same capital allocator you described that's not allocating capital properly, right? It's not spending it prudently, because it doesn't have really an incentive to do so, frankly, right? It's easy come, easy go, right? The money just appeared and we just spend it however we want. Like it wasn't earned, basically. So doesn't that create this vicious cycle where, okay, so where does that go? Where does that go and how does that end?
It ultimately, I mean, what is the Austrian economist, the only way out of a debt bubble is by either voluntary abandonment of the debt bubble in question or complete catastrophe of the currency system involved.
So hyperinflation or deflationary crash back to reality, basically.
Yes, and the really perverse thing about this is that we have a debt-based money system now. Mm-hmm. So even if you chose deflation, it's deflation with an asterisk, austerity. It's with an asterisk, because in a debt-backed money system, once you go into enough deflation that the debt that backs the money starts to default or be haircut, you go through the looking glass into hyperinflation because people are going to run out of the debt into anything else that holds value at par.
Right.
And so your choices really are high inflation, possible hyperinflation. I don't think we'd get hyperinflation in the US because there is a price. We still are a rich country. We are a very diverse economy. There's oil went up 15x, right? 10x, $15 to $150. And we became on a lag the biggest producer of oil. That's that kind of effect. It's right at the right price of everything. We can produce most everything, at least on some level. So it's not like a currency destroying hyperinflation.
Major reserves of resources to back the currency to prevent it from hyperinflating.
So I don't think we'd get a currency destroying hyperinflation. I mean, but high inflation or deflation, which we just talked about, which is not. It'd be deflation for a time until you started defaulting on the underlying the debt that underpins a currency, in which case you might flip back to an actual hyperinflation. There's also sort of productivity miracle around energy. And that's, it ties to me always back to energy. If you have some sort of de facto energy miracle, productivity miracle, whether that's some, widespread commercialization of small modular nuclear reactors. Could that be it? Yeah, it could. Rolled out in an appropriate time horizon, not 10, 15 years. Like, hey, 5 years, we've got one of these things sitting in 40% of the developments in the United States, providing electricity for basically free for thousands of houses, per reactor. Fusion, which is sort of always the fuel of tomorrow, 20 years from now. The UAP stuff that we've seen as a limited hangout in theory.
I don't know what that is. UAP.
These UFO hearings and everything we've been hearing. Have you seen some of this stuff?
I haven't paid attention, no.
So there was a congressional hearing this week in UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, I think is what UAP. It's UFOs.
I've seen some videos, but that's all. Yeah.
So you've seen these military guys, these F-18 pilots. They're like, I just saw something, do something that the rules of physics say it can't do. And it's not just one. It's like, I did. I did. If these things are some sort of classified technology that we have access to, that we're kind of waiting until like the Hail Mary moment to roll out or use, that type of thing, that would be a way out as well, right? Where you get, perfect example is, the UK after the Napoleonic Wars, people in the UK are going to be pissed. I get this wrong. I want to say it's like 1815. Those finished up maybe by 1820.
I think that's about right. Late 1700s, early 1800s. So I could also be wrong though.
They were wildly indebted on the gold standard, didn't want to devalue the pound, and they were able to basically earn their way out of it with productivity. That's what an energy productivity miracle is.
Right.
Okay, what was that? Well, we had the historically unprecedented Industrial Revolution, the discovery and commercialization of fossil fuels, the introduction and commercialization on a compressed time frame of wild technologies like the railroad and steel and just all the boom that sort of went from 1850 to 1950 is not even 1950, 1850 to
today,
1925, right? I think about 75 years. Like they went from like horses to cars and jets. Well, I guess jets not in 25, but airplanes, right?
Soon after, yeah. World War II.
And jets shortly thereafter. So point being, that's the type of leap in terms of productivity miracle you need to get out of, to have that be the resolution rather than high inflation or, restructuring default.
If you enjoyed this clip, click here for the full episode and here for more just like it. Also, like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money and subscribe to stay connected. Thank you.